started, just want to make sure that everyone has signed in over here. It's a mandatory training, so we do need to have record that you've been here. I appreciate you being here. I know it's a sacrifice. It's not easy when you have your job that you have to do and you have to take time out of it to come to an hour-and-a-half training. I know it's tough, but it certainly is necessary that we have these trainings, that we get reminders, and that we understand, as supervisors, you understand what your role is when you have different things come up. So I appreciate you being here. We have Tammy Middleton, who is here from ICRIP. She will be doing the training today. And so please make sure that if you have any questions, if things aren't clear, that now's the time to get those questions answered. So Tammy, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay. It's nice to meet everyone. I know you're super excited. It's probably your favorite training of the year. So it's a little bit about me. It's just kind of a little bit of where I've been. I've taught classes previously for the Idaho Department of Labor, for Micron, and Mountain Home Air Force Base in this type of format. I've taught a lot of classes, of course, internally to organizations that I work for. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So today we're going to go over harassment, discrimination, retaliation, respectful workplace. So in recent years, the HR group, I guess, folks of us out there, have kind of changed harassment to respectful workplace. So it's an overall concept of the culture that you create for your employees and just having a respectful workplace. Respectful workplaces are free of these types of things. So every employee is entitled to a respectful workplace. It's free of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. Today I'm going to take you through what some of those things are. We'll have most of our focus will be on harassment. And we'll talk a little bit about what you do as a supervisor and how you handle those situations. I'm first going to take you through the entire training that I will take your employees through later on today and tomorrow this week, so that you'll know exactly what I've told them. And then we'll go through a little bit of extra material that's just for supervisors. So these are laws that you need to know. I strongly encourage you to take time to look these up and actually read through them and understand a little bit more about what's actually written in the law. I'm not going to go over that with you today. We all know these things are illegal. You can read the laws. And then enforcement for these laws comes from the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Idaho Human Rights Commission, and of course, court. Hopefully we're not going there. So these are protected classes. Anytime we're talking about harassment, retaliation, or discrimination in the workplace, these are the things that we're looking for specifically. This doesn't mean that your environment is free of things like bullying because it's not in a protected class, but these are the ones that get us into litigation. Any questions? Okay, so discrimination is treating an applicant, an employee, a patron, a member of the public, anybody that you touch in your role differently because of a protected characteristic. So that's the important thing to understand, is because of that characteristic. Not because of lack of skills or something of that sort, but because of a protected characteristic. Retaliation, I'm sure you guys have all heard of this. This is the whistleblower protections. So this is retaliation, is when an employer takes any type of adverse action against an employee for engaging in a protected activity. So adverse action, and we'll go over those, but you as supervisors for your organization are considered employers. So it's any time that you would take an action or allow adverse action against an employee. And harassment, any conduct or action based on a protected personal characteristic that is severe or pervasive enough to create a hostile, abusive, or intimidating work environment. It can be sexual harassment or non-sexual harassment. For it to be illegal, it has to rise to the level of severe or pervasive. That's normally determined by somebody like the Idaho Human Rights Commission. So if an employee files a complaint with the EEOC, they'll review it. If they think it needs to be investigated, they'll send it to the Idaho Human Rights Commission, and they'll take more deeper investigative action. Okay, so mostly we're going to work in the harassment area. So here are some numbers just for you to be aware of in the work environment. 77% of the women surveyed, this was in the last, I think 2016, said that they had experienced unwanted sexual attention or sexist comments in the workplace. So the reason that we train on harassment is because this is pervasive. 34% of men report the same. 90% of employees who experience harassment never file a complaint. It's pretty scary when you think about that's going on in your work environment and 90% of your employees never mention it. Why do you think that is? Absolutely. Because 75% of employees who report harassment experience some form of retaliation. So that's a big impact on our culture when there's something bad going on in our organization and people won't report it because they're scared. And you, as supervisors, set that culture. So you're the ones who have to make sure people feel comfortable reporting. Okay, these are victims numbers. So the impact that harassment, discrimination, those types of activities have in your work environment, 31% of the people who are harassed or discriminated against experience clinical anxiety and depression in the workplace, which means they are not working as hard for you as they could be. 22% change their regular routine, which means they stop attending meetings, they start avoiding people, they aren't working this hard, they don't go pick up supplies. Wherever it is they're getting harassed, they start avoiding those types of things. 15% in a romantic relationship. Harassment in the workplace breaks marriages. That is an absolute fact. If you are getting harassed, a lot of times it damages relationships. So it's something to think about. As you know, if any of your employees or yourself have ever went through a breakup or a divorce, it has a negative impact on the workplace. And 9% change job. So they quit, they leave your department, or they leave your organization altogether. That costs money. And the average cost for recruiting and hiring an employee, does anybody know what it is? It's about $25,000. By the time you get them in, you get them trained, they're up to speed and able to work. Okay, so these are high harassment risk areas, just for you to be aware of as supervisors. Women are more likely to be harassed than men, so if you have women who are working for you, be aware of that. Opposite gender dominated jobs. So, for example, male nurses experience a much higher rate of harassment because they're in a female-dominated job. So that's something to be aware of. And then isolation. When you have employees who work in isolated locations, they work on their own. Maybe they work in a back warehouse. Previously, I worked at Gerd Modular Buildings, and we had employees who would work out in the yard in buildings, and they were all by themselves. They were subject to a lot more harassment, so it's something that we had to be aware of. And we further complicated that because those employees sometimes were English as a second language employees, so they were less likely to report, and they were considered a vulnerable community. Or we had employees who were second chance, which means they were work release. I don't know if you guys hire people who have records, but when people are in that position, they frequently don't report because they're so happy or lucky to have a job that they're less likely to report problems. They don't snitch. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. Okay, so unlawful harassment falls in these two categories: quid pro quo, this for that, or hostile work environment. Quid pro quo is pretty easy to understand. It's anytime we exchange this for that. It's not always a raise or a promotion. It can sometimes be something like getting to drive the new truck, getting the best desk, getting a better office, those sorts of things. So it's something to be aware of. And hostile work environment exists when employees' behavior creates an environment at work that makes it difficult or uncomfortable for another person to work. That is a wildly broad category. What makes it difficult? What makes it uncomfortable? Normally, when we ask these questions, we look at the victim. What is their opinion of it? So if you coming into the office, or one of your employees coming into the office, telling jokes and they think that's not a big deal, but another employee is being, feels like that is hostile, that's what we have to measure by. Not that they didn't mean it in that way. So that makes it extra hard for supervisors. Okay, so categories of disrespectful behavior. So these are the types of things that we look for when we talk about harassment. Psychological, bullying, physical, verbal, written, and cyberbullying. Do you guys have any examples of those? All right, let's start with psychological. So psychological bullying is those sorts of things where we isolate. So I'm in a group of 2 or 3 people, the person comes up that we want to exclude, everybody just separates, walks away. You're not welcome here, right? Those types of things. Bullying is exactly what you think it is. It's teasing somebody too far, it's pushing them out of the way, it's isolating them. In some environments that goes as far as more physical, which is like tripping people. Of course, verbal is anything you say. Written, anything in writing, that includes electronic, so sending jokes, inappropriate jokes, wearing t-shirts that are inappropriate, posters, all sorts of things, anything that can be in writing, electronically, or on paper. And cyberbullying. Cyberbullying occurs most often outside of work hours. So are you aware that somebody can bully an employee when they are off the clock and on their personal time? So if I go home and I get on Facebook or Twitter or something of that sort, and I write disrespectful, bullying comments about another employee, that absolutely is in the jurisdiction of you as a supervisor to correct. Make sense? You all do that, right? Yes? Okay, these are some behaviors that can create a hostile work environment. Excluding, ignoring, isolating, or ostracizing. Excluding people from meetings, ignoring them when they talk. Isolating them, sending them off to work by themselves while everybody else works here. And ostracizing them. Opposing or challenging everything the victim says. So they come to a meeting and you have people in there that like argue with every single thing they're saying. That's a hostile work environment. Obvious ones: slurs, insults, degrading comments, disgust, and mocking. So let me give you an example of disgust that happened when I worked at T-Mobile. We had employees there who frequently T-Mobile had potlucks on Friday. Everybody gets together, bring their favorite dish, and they have a potluck. We had a few employees who ate fish on Fridays for religious reasons, okay? And then we have an employee on the other side of the wall that every Friday would come around and talk about how disgusting the fish smelled and why did we let them have fish in there. It was just horrible. Made them gag, made them want to vomit. Every Friday was coming in and doing that. That's hostile work environment, and that's protected behavior. Okay, intolerance towards holidays, traditions, or pressure to convert. Excluding from consideration due to the use of FMLA, ADA, and sick leave. This one happens a lot behind closed doors. So we have a conversation, we're going to promote somebody. We have 2 employees, but one of them has a disability or an illness, and they've been out on FMLA several times in the last year. So we exclude them from consideration because of attendance issues. It's illegal. Teasing, unfairly criticizing, belittling, trivializing, discrediting. You guys getting the idea? Like just about everything that happens in your workplace that's not respectful behavior can get you into a corner. And of course, stripping, cursing, hitting, shoving, kicking, these are all kind of physical behaviors that can lead to hostile work environment charges. And destroying property to intimidate. This one is kind of a challenge. I've never really seen that particular thing happen. With the exception of I had an employee who came in and would talk to when talking that gave break up pencil. I'm not sure what that meant, but I knew it meant something. So it's something I had to address, but that's what I don't see very often. You may see it more. Okay, so let's talk about sexual harassment behavior specifically. Sharing sexual content, this happens a lot. Cell phone with showing people pictures, jokes, telling stories, those sorts of things. Comments, jokes, questions. Obviously, touching, gestures, invading someone's personal space. See this one a lot in the construction environment and sometimes the office environment that I've worked in the past, where you have somebody come in and sit on the desk, put their foot up on the desk and lean in really close to somebody. As supervisors, those are things you should look for. If you see that going on, you might want to have your employees back up and give somebody a little more personal space. We actually have a lawsuit with the personal space one. Not here, in a school. It happened in a school. We had I want to say it was a counselor that liked to come up to the children, the female children, and put his foot up on the bench and lean in really close. So now we're doing a lawsuit for that. Okay, sharing humiliating things about the victim on social media. This one happens in breakups a lot. Two people working together, dating, whatever, some sort of relationship, they break up, and they blast each other's business all over Facebook, or Twitter, or whatever account they're using. So that's something that happens a lot to be aware of. You have people who are dating, spreading lies and gossips on social media, same sort of thing. And then sending harassing messages, means directly to the victim. So all of these types of things happen mostly with sexual harassment, but they can also happen with things, just general harassment. And there's more. Firing, laying off. So these are a lot with retaliation and discrimination. So retaliation happens whenever somebody participates in a protected activity. So things like union behavior, participating in unions, those sorts of things. People who file complaints with your organization. So if they come in and file a misuse of funds or something of that sort, or they report harassment or a complaint of that sort, and then retaliation happens. So, oh man, they're just somebody who's like constantly a troublemaker in our environment. So what we want to do is just find a way to get rid of them. Or COVID happens and it's time to shake the fleas off your back and lay off a bunch of people that have been problems. That can be retaliation. So just make sure that the reasons that you're firing, laying, demoting, those sorts of things are based in grounded facts that you've already documented. Reassignment to a less desirable position, reducing pay and hours, starve them out, falsely accusing them of poor performance. So they've been doing really great, they've been getting whatever, straight fives on your performance reviews, then they report something, now suddenly they're a not acceptable level of performance. These things are the stuff that, I'll just be honest with you, the lawyers really go after. They're going to look for this. They're going to look for your past assessments, things that you've said about the employee and what you said after the event. Blacklisting and constructive discharge. Does anybody know what that is? Constructive discharge? So this is a legal term, and what it means is you ran them out of the business. So they did something you didn't like, or discrimination, but or retaliated, they reported something. So we're just making their life living hell, heck, until we run them out of the business. So we exclude them from lunches. We forget to invite them to important meetings, so they don't know what the new policy is. We give them the crappy truck to drive that breaks down all the time. We just make their life miserable until they leave the organization. If this happens, the attorneys will go in and say, you forced him out of the business, you did it on purpose, and now you have to pay the bill. Okay, so let's talk about preventing harassment. Right? That's what we all want to do, to prevent this in our workplace. So who does it apply to? Again, harassment, discrimination, retaliation, those sorts of things can apply to anybody that you touch in your job. So people who report to you, your bosses, the public that you interact with, people from other organizations, vendors, suppliers. Any of those people can be harassed by your employees, and they can harass your employees. So if they harass your employees, you also have to address that, because your employee is still entitled to a workplace that's free of those things, even if the person that's doing the harassing doesn't work for you. Okay, so with employees' responsibilities in a respectful workplace, your employees need to know your agency's policies and follow them. They need to be respectful. This should probably be covered, or I'm sure is covered in your code of ethics. And equipping themselves to respond to inappropriate situations. We talk about harassment and retaliation a lot, but we do not teach our employees what to do when this happens, right? So what we're going to do is show them a little bit of how they can react to that so it doesn't rise to the level of pervasive in your environment. So the roles of harassment. The first one is a target. This is the person who is targeted. So, number one, don't ignore it. Don't feel like because you report it, you're going to get in trouble. And don't hope that it's going to go away, because it's not. A lot of people who harass intentionally go through a process called grooming. Does anybody know what that is? Yes? No? No one? Couple? Okay. So grooming behavior is when we start with something small, and then we work up to something big. So maybe it's just coming over and putting your hand on someone's shoulder, and then pretty soon it's putting your arm around their shoulder, pretty soon it's a back rub, on and on we go. And now we have a lawsuit. So we want to nip those things in the bud. So when you're feeling uncomfortable with something, say something. If you don't know how to say something, and you guys are all supervisors, so I'll tell your employees, if they don't know how to say something, to tell you guys, and you'll say it for them. You'll help them. Tell the person to stop. This is the hardest thing to do, because when the target tells someone to stop, the most common reaction is defense. Whoa, geez, I didn't mean anything by it. Geez, you're so sensitive. I was just joking, right? Those types of things instead of, and so people are scared to say something because they don't want that kind of reaction. They don't want to be labeled as a troublemaker in your environment. Report it. I encourage all employees to report everything to you guys, the supervisors, because you cannot fix it if you do not know about it. And most people who harass are smart enough that they aren't going to do it in front of you. They're not going to roll in front of you and start rubbing someone's shoulder or pat them on the behind or whatever that behavior is. They're smart enough to know that's not acceptable. So your employees have to report it to you so you can take action. Don't quit. A lot of people just run. If the behavior is pervasive in the environment and they don't feel like they can be successful and they don't feel like they can get away from it, they just quit. And that's when it starts costing you money, because you have to replace people all the time. Document. Document, document, document. Even if you're scared to tell your supervisor what happened, write it down, because the second time it happens, you're going to want to tell them, and you need to remember when it happened. Make sense? Are you guys happy I'm telling this to your employees? A little bit nervous? You should be. Usually after we have these conversations with employees, you'll get a lot of reports. So expect a little uptick. So they may come to you with a lot of information. Okay, roles of the accused. This is the person who's accused of harassment. So I want a fair playing field, so I will instruct them on what to do a little bit. First, stop when you're asked. Don't go back and say it was just a joke. Don't accuse the person of being sensitive. Just stop. Just stop. That's okay. It doesn't mean that you meant any harm. Just stop. Take it seriously. So if somebody asks you to stop a behavior, stop. Take it seriously. Don't joke around about it. Don't make fun of them. Don't make accusations. Just stop. Take it seriously. Apologize. This is the biggest one that can trigger a complaint, is that we don't apologize for our actions because we're afraid that we are admitting guilt. And you are not. You're absolutely not admitting that you're guilty of harassing somebody because you apologize for something that may have made them upset or made them concerned. It is always appropriate to say, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that made you uncomfortable, I won't do it. You're not saying, oh, I'm sorry I harassed you. It's not the same thing. And most of the times, an apology will stop it right there. The failure to apologize is what escalates things into complaints. And of course, don't retaliate because it's illegal. So you want to make sure no retaliation is happening. So don't take it out on them. Don't go gossip around to everybody else and talk about the situation. Try to defend yourself. Don't try to build your side of the case that, you know, they're just being a baby or whining, you know, and you did nothing. Just drop it there. And then tell your side of the story. When you're asked about it, when the supervisor comes in and they ask you about it, or maybe you're sitting down with HR, tell your side of the story. Yes, I walked over there, put my hand on so-and-so's shoulder. They said stop, I took my hand off. I said I was sorry. That's it. That's all there needs to be. So make sure that you tell your side of the story. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about bystanders. So bystanders are the people who witness harassment, retaliation, discrimination in your work environment. First of which, are you aware that somebody who witnesses those things can also bring charges of harassment against your organization? Yeah? It's kind of like harassment by proxy. So, if I'm an employee and I'm sitting at my desk working and I see my coworker over there, the boss comes in, hush hush, whisper whisper, foot on the desk, leaning in, whatever's going on over there, and next thing I know my coworker is getting their own office. I could file a complaint of harassment. You guys know why? Because I didn't do those things, whatever I think is going on over there, and I didn't get the office. So now there's this kind of established thing that you have to be real close buddy-buddy with the boss if you want to get something good. So be aware of that in your work environment. Bystanders also can make complaints. If they hear somebody making racial slurs against a coworker, they're going to back up because they don't want to become the next target, right? So you have to make sure that you're aware of your culture in those regards. So first of all, if you are the bystander, so you are not the accused, if you're not the target, don't participate. So if somebody's standing there, hey, got a joke to tell you, blah, 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 and tell some really inappropriate joke. As a bystander, don't roll up there and start laughing about it. Don't go along with it. Because if you do that, you're helping create a culture where those things are okay, and they're not. Don't ignore it. That happens a lot with bystanders. We see something going on over there. I don't want to be the next target, so I'm just going to pretend like I don't see it when it goes away. It's not going to go away, and if you're a witness to it, you will be giving testimony. Just paying attention to your environment. This is a kind of, don't put your head in the sand. Be aware of what's going on around you. If you see an employee start avoiding things or walking away or fleeing the scene, that's what I call when you have a whole group of people standing around telling jokes or something that may be inappropriate, and you see one person just kind of, I'm out of here. I don't want to be part of that. Fleeing is an indication that something is uncomfortable. Distract. So, this is how you can intervene in a situation. So if you see somebody come up and they're telling a joke and it's inappropriate, somebody's comfortable, get in there. Just walk up and say, hey, can you help me with this report, or I didn't know where this was, or anything. Just distract, break that up so that the situation moves forward and you can stop that from happening. You can do this in meetings. If someone is being harassed in the sense that they're really getting chewed out for something and this happens to them all the time, you can raise your hand, ask a question, move on to the next slide, whatever that is. If you can break that, it's less likely to elevate to the level of being unlawful. Obviously, if you're feeling brave and confident in your role, you can address it directly. So you can just go over there and say, hey, Cindy, I don't think you should be telling those kinds of jokes in the workplace. And of course, report it. If you see things happening in your work environment, you have to report them to your supervisor. Report it, report it, report it. Again, they cannot take action. They don't know what's going on. And acknowledge. This is one that we miss a lot. Hey, Cindy, I saw that, they were telling that joke, and I'm really sorry that happened. It seemed like it made you uncomfortable. Sometimes acknowledging someone so that they know they're not alone, they know that other people are seeing the same thing that they are, will give them the courage to either say stop or to go to their supervisor or to go to HR and report it. Okay, so this is what the process of what happens when people report complaints. First is a complaint. So that will happen. Someone will make a complaint, or they'll come in, and maybe a supervisor, they'll just tell you something like, oh, so-and-so is doing whatever. And they don't say, hey, I would like to make a formal complaint about this behavior. They'll just tell you what's going on. It's your responsibility at that point to take it to the next step. So they need to make a complaint. They need to either you write their statement, send it to HR, but there'll be a complaint that'll happen at some point in the training. Then there will be an investigation. It is the responsibility of your leadership team and your HR department to handle investigations. As supervisors, you should not be investigating any sort of situation that goes on with your employees. And the reason being is because you will be one of the people that will be called in to give a statement. How did these employees interact in the past? What did you have for difficulties? Those sorts of things. So you can't be on both sides of that. So that will go to whoever your organization assigns to investigate. So after the investigation, all the witnesses are interviewed, the people are interviewed, the target, the accused, everybody's interviewed. Your leadership team gets together, and they will come up with a resolution. So that can be, nothing happened that was unlawful. Maybe we need to have a little bit of coaching conversations. Or they may decide that some sort of disciplinary action is necessary, and they'll advise the supervisor of that, or they'll take that disciplinary action. For the person who complains, the target, there should always be follow-up for both the target and the accused. So either your HR team, or that may end up being you as a leader, may have to sit down with the employees and follow up with them. What will not happen is sharing any disciplinary action or anything that happens to other employees. So those conversations are sometimes like, we've investigated, we've come to a resolution, appropriate actions have been taken. That is an important step, even though that I just didn't give you any information right there. But it's still important to have that conversation, especially with the target, to let them know that they are being heard in your organization. That something was looked into, and a determination was made, and an action was taken. Sharing with them what that action is not necessary. Okay, from here on in this presentation, you have to talk. So I'm going to give you some scenarios and some role plays. The faster we go through these, the sooner you will get out of here. Okay, so we're going to identify the unlawful behavior. So James works on your road crew. His coworkers recently found out that he is gay and have started calling him princess. What is it? Hostile work environments, harassment, protected class. He's being targeted. Okay, Gail has dyslexia. She advised the city of that when she was hired, so they were aware. She attended educational conferences, has to turn in her receipts. She submits her expense reports for $81.04 for lunch, which was really $18.40. Her supervisor rejects the report, accuses her of fraud, and restricts her from attending further conferences. What is it?
Disability ADA.
It's ADA, it's definitely a disability. So this could swing one of two ways. This could be retaliation, but most likely this is discrimination. So they were aware of it. This could likely be, based on the error that happened, this could be related to the disability. So it's most likely discrimination. Okay. Mike, who is male, is an administrative assistant. He works in a common office with 3 other administrative assistants who are all female. Every Friday, all the female administrative assistants go to lunch. What is it? Yep. they're ostracizing. So this would fall under harassment, hostile work environment. I know you're thinking, what? They're on their own time. They're at lunch. It doesn't, they're off the clock. What does what they do matter? This is why it matters. It's a regular meeting with consistent exclusion for this employee. So this is a hostile work environment for him. Could be. Maybe he doesn't care. He don't want to go. But in this situation, you could have that happen. And I'll give you an example of how it happened in an organization in my past. That led up to a lawsuit later on. So when I worked at Gurdon Modular Buildings, there were very few females who worked in that organization. And one of the engineers got pregnant. And so all the women in the office got together to have a baby shower. So on the company email, they sent out an announcement for the baby shower, inviting all the other female employees, of which there were like 32 out of 270, to a baby shower. Any ideas what happened? The male employees that complained that they were excluded. They were friends of this engineer, they wanted to come to the party, and they were excluded. So it was a very odd conversation to say you have to invite everybody or nobody to these types of events if it's during work and if it's only work employees. Now, had this happened outside of work, invitations been sent on personal email outside of work and included people who were not employees, it wouldn't have been a problem. But because it happened at work with work employees and a specific group was excluded by their gender, it was a problem. Awful, right? Things to watch for. Okay, maintenance crew. Keeps a stock of equipment, oil, and other lubricants for machinery. Larry's new. He mentions to his buddy he's going to change his oil that weekend. His coworker Bob says, hey, go grab yourself some oil when you do that oil change. Larry asks his boss, is it okay if I grab that oil? His boss is like, absolutely not. Pulls everybody in, team meeting, everybody gets chewed out. Then, after the meeting, Bob goes around asking each person who told the boss about people using the oil. What is it? You have to be louder. Thoughts? It's retaliation. It's retaliation because Larry participated in a protected activity. So he told his boss about the oil that is protected, and now Bob's trying to find out who did it. Make sense? Okay. These will be a little bit harder. These are role plays. So, the coworker from another department keeps asking you out on a date and bringing you candy. What would you say to the coworker? You don't like candy? It's good, good, right? It's gentle, pushes them back a little bit. Absolutely, tell me you're not interested. As a supervisor, your employee tells you this, what would you do? Document it, perfect. What else? Perfect. You want to talk to that other employee who's doing it and tell them to back off. And maybe, I don't know how your structure is, but maybe you talk to the supervisor and they talk to their employee, but you need to address it.
Well, I wouldn't be, I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking somebody out, right? I mean, I don't understand.
There's the persistent. Depends if
Sure.
it's one.
Sure. So let's talk about that, right?
If that person says, I don't want to go out with you,
Okay.
you can keep giving them candy and keep asking her out because she doesn't know.
You can't, but why can't you? Because if you're asking me out, let's say it's you and me, and every Thursday you come down to my office and give me candy and ask me out. I'm here to work. I'm not here to be asked on dates. I'm not here to be subjected to that. And it makes me uncomfortable because I know you're coming and I know I'm going to have to tell you no. And now I'm going to get up from my desk and try to avoid 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I know you're on break. I'm going to go do something else. I'm not working. So that's how it escalates in a work environment that results in complaints. Make sense?
That person should tell them from the get-go.
They should. They should. And we all hope that you as supervisors are making your employees comfortable enough to do that. But they may not be. So let me give you an example.
Well, she needs to come to me and tell, I mean,
Yes.
You'll
Yes.
never go on a date if you never ask somebody, and you'll never get asked if you never.
That's absolutely true, but work's not the place to be looking for your mate. It creates a hostile work environment, and we pay suits for it all the time. So let me give you a couple of other examples of why that happens and why it's a problem.
I mean, it's all right.
So,
I'm the one having to care about it, so don't worry about it.
so let me tell you a story though. Let me give you an example. So you have a new employee, new receptionist, okay, right? So I worked at Gurdon, and it's construction heavy, male dominated. We've got everybody in the house that, and you know how construction is, so it's a lot of young guys. And so we hired a new receptionist at the front desk, who was also young. She was a nice looking lady. Her first day of work, she got asked out 6 times. 6 times. That's pervasive. That's a culture where people think that's okay. Like, woo, there's someone new in the house, let's all go see who's going to get a date. So for her, she quit. She didn't want to be subjected to that. She wanted to be able to come to work and not be asked out. Now, was one person asking her out multiple times? Absolutely not. But what happened was there was an environment there. It was like a pack of wolves. They're running out of the business. So pervasive can sometimes be frequency in your organization and not necessarily one person. Is it wrong to ask somebody out? Are you going to go to jail if you ask somebody on a date? No, you will not. Generally speaking. It's these other situations that you need to be made aware of. And just understanding that we come to work, and your employees should feel free to work. And they should be able to focus on the work. Okay, so your work area is hectic, it's a little gross, people swear at each other all the time. One of your workers visits the website, gets the gross joke of the day, and tells it to the team. Most people are participating, but some people see uncomfortable. As a supervisor, what do you do?
Shut it down.
Conversation with everybody, shut it down. This is something that's going to spin up into a situation for you.
Well, it's inappropriate because it's being done during work hours in the first place.
Absolutely. There's a dozen ways you could go in this conversation. That's a work resource, looking it up on your computer. Don't be doing that. You guys are all public. Everything that's on your computer can be pulled off for under a records request, right? So that's a conversation that you can have. But the most important thing is to change that culture, to shut that down and get people focused on the work.
Are dad jokes considered gross jokes?
Guess it depends on the dad joke. Okay, so your boss suggests, but not in so many words, that if the two of you were to develop a relationship outside of work, things would go your way. How do you deal with that?
Document and report it.
Document and report it. Excellent. What do you do when your employee comes and tells you that your boss is harassing them? This is going on. How would you handle that?
And take it.
That's a sticky wicket, right? When it's your boss. That's when you lean on your HR team. Go in and talk to them and let them help you with that situation. Okay, so this portion, so that's the class that your employees will get over the next couple of days. That's what I'm going to talk to them about. Those are the things I'm going to instruct them about, tell them to do, and advise them of. Any concerns? Good. So, supervisors only. The important thing is we want to eradicate sexual harassment out of your workplace. Make sure that you have a respectful workplace. So, each supervisor is responsible for knowing your agency's policy. Have you all read it? Your harassment policy? No? Okay. If you were hired more than 2 years ago and you have not looked at your employee manual in that time, please take time to look at that policy and ask questions. Just make sure that you're aware, because when your employees decide to sue, that's the first thing they're going to grab is that policy, and they're going to hold you accountable to it. And I don't want you to think that it's all about litigation, because it's not. I'm not going to try to teach you how to skirt the law. I'm going to try to encourage you to create a respectful culture in your environment. but it is something to absolutely be aware of. Ensure that your direct reports have been trained on harassment. So obviously, people are coming to this class, they'll get trained. But there's nothing wrong with you guys having a 5-minute huddle up beginning of your shift sometime, or whenever you do your regular team meetings. Just giving people a reminder if you see things going on. Lead by example, obviously. Please don't harass your employees, discriminate against them, retaliate against them. Be that shining example. And address harassment immediately and effectively and document. So if your employee comes to you and they say, I was super uncomfortable in the meeting the other day when 2 employees were discussing how funny it was that the police shot somebody and that they deserved it. And that victim happened to be black. It is not okay for you to say something like, that's just how they are, they didn't mean anything by it, right? You have to address it. Effectively means talk with your HR team, retrain your people, meet up with those 2 people, talk to them about what they said and why that can be offensive and help them understand. And then document, document, document. Most of the things that you as supervisors will deal with on a day in, day out basis will not rise to the level of pervasive. But a pattern of behavior can rise to that level. So, if you have an employee who's doing something, it's not that big of a deal, but they're doing it all the time, then that can be pervasive. And your documentation is what's going to demonstrate that that's happening and allow you to be able to address it. Okay, these are behaviors that I encourage you as supervisors to just watch your people. And if you see these things happening, you might want to ask a few questions and dig into it a little bit more. Fleeing. Again, you have a group of people, they're talking, they're joking, they're laughing, you see one person like, I'm out of here. Pay attention to what the conversation is and see why that person may have fled. So, most often that is when there's joking going on that's inappropriate, there's criticizing of another employee that's going on inappropriately, and sometimes they're just walking off. But as a supervisor, it's just an indicator, just check it out, look into it, see if there's something you need to know about. Laughing along. How are you going to figure this one out, right? But let's say that you have a group of employees who are telling jokes, racist joke, right? And you happen to have, let's say they're telling jokes about black people, and you have a black person standing there laughing along with the jokes. Everything's okay, right? They're laughing along, they think it's funny too. Chances are they're scared of retaliation in your environment, so they're going to laugh along because they don't want to be called out. They don't want people to think they're not a team player. It's something you need to address. The joke should be going on in the first place, but just because people are laughing along, don't assume that they agree with it or it's not going to be a problem for you later. When this comes up in court, laughing along does not get the employer off the hook. This happens frequently with women. They laugh along because, especially if they're working in male-dominated industries or businesses, they laugh along because if you don't get along with the big boys, you're likely to not get promoted. You have to be a part of the team. And so just be aware of it, watch for it, and if you see it, check it out. Maybe nothing's wrong, but at least check it out. Silence. People are carrying on, you have that one person in the meeting that's just not talking. Maybe they don't agree with what's being said, they don't agree with the comments, but they don't say anything. It's like when you're talking to your kids, they don't like what you're advising them they need to do regarding their chores, and so they just stand there and stare at you, and they're like, you know they're disagreeing, but they're not saying anything. This happens in work environments as well. Absenteeism. If you have somebody who may have been subjected to harassment, those sorts of things, absentee is a big one. For me, at Gordon, with our front desk, this happened several times. I can't tell you how many receptionists that we went through until we got this under control. But one of the things that would start happening is they'd start calling out. They just want to come to work. They just have enough of it, and they just would call out sick. And so that's something to be aware of. And when we dug into it and really investigated the situation, that's what was going on. They just didn't want somebody coming up and leaning on the desk all day, chit-chatting about their weekend and something else, and then eventually asking them out. Or just hanging out there all the time, being in their space. Hygiene. It's a weird one, right? Sometimes when people are harassed in their work environment, they go through kind of a depression, and they will stop taking a shower. They like to repel people from being around them. This happens a lot. It's kind of a passive way of saying stay away from me, is I just won't take a shower for a couple of days before I come to work, so you will stay out of my space. So hygiene is something you always have to address. But if somebody is historically, this is not a problem for them, and suddenly it becomes a problem, you might want to look into it. And self-isolating. This is when people are like, oh, I'm not going to come to that meeting. I can't make it today. I've got too many reports on my desk. That sort of thing starts happening. Or they don't want to go into a particular area, or they make excuses. They don't want to go out to the shop, or maybe they ask somebody else to go get things for them. That's something to be aware of. Questions? Okay, so these are just some reasons to understand why your employees don't report it to you. All these things are happening, they're unhappy, they're struggling, whatever. These are reasons they don't. Fear of retaliation, repercussions, being called names, being isolated, being accused of not being a team player, being labeled as a troublemaker or sensitive or princess, any of those types of things. People don't believe them. As supervisors, sometimes it is challenging to believe our employees because we don't see it. Your employees will make every effort to not do these types of things in front of you. At least I hope they have the good sense to try not to be that blatant. But so the employees who are targeted are frequently concerned that you won't believe them or that they won't be believed. Lack of response by the organization. So I've complained 15 times about this person doing this. Nothing ever happens. If they tell you, you must take action. If you don't take action, you're culpable. That does not mean you have to fire somebody. That does not mean you have to discipline somebody. But you do have to report it, and you do need to look into it. If you don't, you're in the hot seat. So hand that stuff off, write it down, and give it to your HR people, give it to your leadership team, and let them deal with it. As long as you did your part and you're reporting it, then it's on them to make sure that they're taking appropriate actions. And some people actually think they may have brought it on themselves. I showed up to work and I was female, so, you know, showed up to work and I was black, and so whatever. Or maybe maybe it's something more subtle, like I'm just not very good at my job, I'm struggling, I don't know how to do this stuff, so that's why people are saying stuff to me or being mean to me. Okay, handling complaints. As a supervisor, when you get a complaint from your employee, it does not have to be formal, and they do not have to use the word complaint. Just like with FMLA, somebody doesn't have to ask for FMLA, they just have to tell you that they need to be off work. The same thing with harassment and retaliation complaints. They do not have to say the words. So we can't, as an organization, create a situation of magic word. If you don't say the magic word, nothing's going to happen. So, all complaints, write it down, even if you don't think it is a complaint, write it down. All complaints have to be reported according to your policy. Generally speaking, I advise employees to, if they have a concern in their workplace, to speak to any member of leadership. So you may get complaints from people who are not your employee for whatever reason. Maybe their boss isn't in, maybe it's their boss that's doing it, those sorts of things. So you have to report those according to your policy. So any member of leadership can hear the story, and then you turn that over to your leadership team or your HR department and let them take it from there. Just make sure that you don't create a funnel. So if an employee is being harassed, we don't want to have a situation where they only can report it to HR and then the HR person's on vacation so they can't report it. Any of you should be able to hear a complaint and move it forward to the right person. That's how you get this stuff out of your organization. And then all complaints have to be investigated by a designated person. We covered that earlier, just making sure that somebody is designated to investigate it, and that's the person doing the investigating. Not the employees, not the supervisor going around asking questions about it. Let's leave it to that person, whoever's designated. And then don't dismiss complaints as invalid.
Just one comment on that funnel thing. Just, it might be good for everybody who's a supervisor to know that the way we have it set up with the city is they can go to Terry in the HR department, they can come to me, or they can go to the city attorney. We have those three people that are designated to receive complaints.
Perfect. So as you as supervisors, that's your policy and that's where you take it to report it to those three folks. And then never dismiss a complaint as invalid. A lot of times things escalate because in this space an employee comes forward and they'll tell you a story about something that happened and we're like, oh, they didn't mean it, they're just joking. Those are the two things that happen. I cannot tell you how many times they're dismissed. And then 6 months later it comes up and bites you in the behind because now it's happened 3 more times, or they've decided that you weren't listening to them, so they hire themselves an attorney and file a tort claim. So we want to avoid that. Okay, a little bit more practice and then you're out of here. Okay, Cindy's always sitting on Kyle's desk talking. And I, as your employee, come up and tell you this. Cindy's always sitting on someone's desk talking. I don't think they're talking about work. What are you going to do? Perfect. Go talk to Cindy and Kyle. Find out what's going on over there. And then maybe you'll have to take steps and say, maybe I shouldn't be, sitting on the desk. That doesn't look good. Let's, stand when we're talking to people. Be respectful of their personal space.
Did you just tell us the supervisors are not supposed to be investigating it? So where's the line there between investigating and talking to them about it?
You, as a supervisor, can address it. And that's what we're talking about addressing here. So if you, as a supervisor, know that's going on, you can address it. You can go over and find out what's going on. If you think it's something, or it always, we'll say always, you should always turn that over to your HR team. So this is a complaint that came to me. An employee came and told me Cindy's always sitting on Kyle's desk and talking. I talked to them. They said it's all business. This is what there you go. It's up to them to decide if they want to investigate it, move it forward, and talk to other people in the office. They should also talk to the person who is the witness. So you should address it as a supervisor. Your team will likely go talk to Cindy about what's going on. They'll talk to Kyle. They'll talk to the other person, find out how many times it's happened. Those are things that you probably shouldn't dig into. That would be investigation. How many times has this happened? How many times have you seen it? That sort of thing. Does that make sense? Let's see if I can clarify.
So no matter what their response is, when you go talk to those two, then you still document all that, turn that in, no matter what their response is.
Yep, you should still report it because if it comes up again and it continues to be a problem, or if you see Cindy over there, even though you're like, hey, that doesn't look good, scoop our feet, keep seeing that happen, you're going to want to have that documented and that history turned over to your leadership team.
What about instance, this happens more than you have the employee come to you and say, look, Chief, I don't know if you know about this is something this has happened, but you can't tell anybody. You can't say that, because if you say anything, then they'll know it's me.
Yep.
I brought that up. That happens.
Horrible, and it happens all the time.
And so you're kind of like, well, if I address it, then I have, that maybe the next time the employee won't come and talk to you people.
Yep. So, that happens a lot, right? I'm going to tell you something, but don't tell. First of all, set the stage. You cannot come to me as a member of your leadership team and report potentially illegal activity and expect me to sit on my hands. I have an obligation to my organization, to fellow employees, to report it, and it's going to be reported. I will handle it with as much discretion as possible. I absolutely support you, but we're going to have to look into it. Because what is the real purpose that they came and told you?
It's somebody's bothering them.
Right, because they're not comfortable. That's why they told you in the first place. They don't want to be the bad guy. That's okay. You be the bad guy. You report it. You take action. You do what you need to do. And we'll go over a scenario like that. That's a very common one.
So are you saying that if somebody comes in and reports it, that whoever that complaint's on should know who that person is? Does that make sense? So
No.
in that instance, if if somebody
So what I'm
goes
saying
in,
is like, yeah, like,
does that person have the right to know who came in and made that complaint?
Who complained about
The
them?
person being complained on,
Yes.
does that person have that right to know who that person is?
Yeah, because they have a right to tell their side of the story, right? So we're innocent until proven guilty. We don't, that's kind of how our society works. So if you're going to come in, and it's difficult, and I understand that this is a very fine line, you're on the razor's edge as a supervisor. It's very difficult to tell somebody, if there's a problem, come and talk to me. Tell me what's going on, help me help you. But on the other hand, saying, it's gonna be investigated, we're gonna look into it. And the accused has a right to tell their side of the story. I have seen situations where terminations have went all the way down to we're firing this person for what they did, and we never let them tell their side of the story. Will not stand up in court. You have to hear their side of the story, you have to investigate it. And so, all the time with workplace things, can't really have secrets, and we can't really promise, especially as a member of leadership, that you are not going to tell anyone, or you're not going to look into it. You just have to make sure that when you do that, that person is protected against retaliation. And yes, somebody is gonna know that they did it. And it's important, your team who investigates that and your team who deals with the behavior are going to sit down with that person and tell them, this is what's going on, tell me your side of the story. Understand that we have a zero retaliation policy in this organization. You may not ostracize them, you may not react to them, you may not gossip about them, you may not put stuff on social media, and if you do, disciplinary action will be taken. Now, is that a perfect system? Are people still gonna do stuff? Absolutely they are. But it's our responsibility to be on top of that and address it when it happens. And the more you address it when it happens, the more trusting your organization and your employees will become. The more you take action against those sorts of things, people will understand that that's not okay. That's not a part of your culture, and it's not okay. Sometimes you have to trim a few branches to save the tree. If you've got a bad actor in your organization and they're creating liability for you, you gotta address it. Harassment complaints are not an assurance of privacy. We ask people, and your investigative team are trained on how to do these types of things to set the stage, to say, I will not tell anybody that I don't have to tell. I will share the results with the leadership team. We will address it, but it cannot be in complete secrecy because we are going to, if there are, interview witnesses. We will talk with your supervisor about the history of the employees. This is part of an investigation and it has to happen. And yeah, I know. That will sometimes make people feel like they don't want to report it because they don't want to be on center stage. We have to create a comfortable environment.
So do we have to wait until it's reported to us as supervisors before we can talk to the HR? Like if we're seeing it, but they're not reporting it to us?
Absolutely go talk to your HR. They will help you, your leadership team, lots of training in these areas. They will help you address it. They will help you do those sorts of things. And if you're seeing it, you're still in that bystander space, even though you're supervisor, so you can certainly interrupt it. But you absolutely report it to them. They cannot fix things that they don't know about. They're the ones who are the keepers of all the reports, right? So they're the ones who are going to say, okay, this may not raise to the level of pervasive, but we've had 3 separate reports of this person doing that behavior, so now we have a trend, and then they can address it. Yes?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing from you is if there is a small problem, discretion, whatever, as a supervisor, you can handle it to a point, but it always has to be turned over to HR.
Yes.
And do you realize that that could cause a problem with people not coming because they don't want it to go that far up the chain? It's just minor.
Has to go. Has to go. And that's the thing, is that yes, it may be minor. And you as supervisors are responsible to address the behavior of your employees. So if you see your employee come up and just pop somebody on the behind, you do not need to go report that and wait for it to be investigated to take action. You go up and say, that is not acceptable behavior, don't do that. Then you report it.
Well, that to me is not a minor discretion, but But-
Right, it is. You know, depends on your environment, I think, you know, but no, you're right, it isn't. But those types of things have to happen, and yes, you know, just because you report it to your leadership team, it doesn't mean they're gonna go, you know, tearing your house down. It may be something that they can just take a note of, but they may watch for trends. So we don't need to open a full-blown investigation until there's a complaint. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you got to address things as a supervisor. You need to lead the way. You have to address bad behavior. You have to set an example. But you should be reporting those types of incidents to your leadership team. It's their responsibility to decide how, when, what, where for investigating.
So is it wrong to ask that person, somebody's got a complaint or they tell you something? Like, have you talked to that person?
Sure.
And ask them.
Yeah, you can ask them.
If you will talk to them, maybe it'll stop, you know, and it won't have to go.
You need to, I would ask them if they, you know, have you told Cindy to stop sitting on your desk? Okay, no, because I'm not comfortable doing that. Okay, so now you know, and then you can say something, okay? Addressing the behavior is not the same as investigating a complaint. So you can go to Cindy and say, don't sit on their desk, that's not appropriate.
So what if it's the supervisor doing the actions?
Please say no.
I'm asking a question.
If it's a supervisor who's doing it,
What if I
then
have
you
to
need
get
to.
on Bob because he keeps sitting on my desk and I don't like it?
Well, if you're too scared to tell Bob to stop it, then you should go to your HR or to Bob's boss and advise them of the situation and have them address it. Yeah, and sadly, it is supervisors a lot, because most types of harassment, retaliation, those sorts of things come from a position of power, right? So if a coworker comes up and asks me on a date, you know, I can tell them, no, get away from me. But if your supervisor asking you on a date, goes through your mind, okay, well, what if I say no? You know, if your supervisor is like, hey, you want to go out after work and have a drink? And you don't want to, but you're like, oh, gosh, I want to be a part of the team, and I don't want to be excluded, and you know, all those types of things go through your mind when there's a power disparity, or through your employee's mind when there's a power disparity. So those are a little more challenging. Questions?
Can you maybe address like the timeliness?
Oh, timeliness, yes. So when you're, obviously when your employees report things to you, it is important. So I usually try to put, this is tight, and I know you guys have difficult schedules and challenges in your work, but I usually recommend same-day reporting. So you want to let your HR or leadership team know that something has happened and report it to them the same day whenever possible. And the reason being is because the longer you know about it, the more it happens, the more liable you are. That makes sense. So if somebody came to you and reported a complaint, and then you sat on it for, you know, a week, and it happened 3 more times, that's a problem. Does that make sense? Okay. Let me check this out. We're doing on time. Okay. So, Carla, who is Latino, has been a longtime employee of the city. She's working as a senior administrative assistant. She complains to you several times about being paid less than her Caucasian coworker, and finally went to HR. On her next evaluation, her supervisor marked her down for having poor attitude, not being a team player. Her manager also took some responsibilities off of her desk. What do you guys think about that situation? How many things are wrong here? So frequency. She complained several times and didn't feel like her supervisor was doing anything, so then she went to HR. So that creates a pattern of behavior, and then, of course, her next evaluation, she gets in trouble. That looks like what? Retaliation. Absolutely. So protected behavior because she's reporting what she feels like is being treated differently based on her race and initially being ignored and now being retaliated against. This is a little snippet from a real case, not in Idaho. Anybody want to take a swing at what this case settled for? It's like $10.9 million. Oh, this is, when people sue for these types of things, it's serious. It's very, very serious. And it can be very, very costly. Okay, Heather's your top performer. She goes the extra mile, she's super smart, she's innovative, she's been with your department for 3 years, and because of Heather, your department received a substantial 4-year grant that will really benefit your community. Heather is heading up the grant administration. This is her baby, she's running it. You know you'll lose this grant without her, and she knows it as well. In the last 3 months, you received 4 complaints about Heather telling sexist jokes, referring to her male coworkers as boys, and advising the mayor to just let one of the man children handle the menial tasks. Now what are you going to do? Report it. Right? I would do the same thing. I'd just hand that straight over to HR. This is what's going on because this is called bell ringer, right? Bell ringer in your organization if you have bell ringer culture. And this is when you have to be very careful because people who are extraordinarily high performers can have some of the worst behavior in your organization because they know their value, they know what they're worth to your organization, and sometimes that seems like permission to behave the absolute worst. So they're bell ringers. And so you need to make sure of 2 things in bell ringer situations. 1, that you don't let this happen. Nobody is irreplaceable, right? So I always think of it this way. In your organization, if somebody got hit by a bus, you would have to bring your organization forward the next day. You would have to continue the work. You would have to continue to do the job. That's how it is. So no one is irreplaceable, and it's not worth the lawsuits that you can get from these types of situations. It's not worth morally diminishing human beings who work for you to keep these types of bell ringers. And the other issue in these types of situations is we tend to celebrate these people in our organizations, right? So, woohoo, Heather got a grant. Let's all give it up for her, right? What did you just say to everybody else in your organization who she's been harassing? It's okay. We like her anyway. That's not okay. So that's something you really need to be aware of, and that can get you into dark places. Okay. Maria is 6 months pregnant. After 10 years of working with your agency, she applies for a senior position that just opened. Despite having more experience and qualifications than other applicants, she's passed over. Any thoughts on what this might be? Discrimination. Pregnancy is a protected class. So we need to make sure, since this person was more qualified than the person who got the job, that the decision was not made because we know she's going out on maternity leave.
How do you, what if she's a really poor performer? Yeah, she's been here for a long time and she's passed the test, but she's a poor performer, so we pick somebody else because they're
If she's a poor performer, she's a poor performer. Please have that documented and have a history of that documentation when this decision is made. Because if it's all in your head, all those poor performance things, and we don't have it in writing, she's a great performer when she sues. I guarantee it.
And that was kind of my same thought was, yeah, experience and qualifications, but, and maybe she's not even that poor of a performer, but just doesn't have attitude things that you, and I guess it's the same thing, you just have to kind of document those and explain those to them.
Just have a paper trail behind it. So if this person has maybe she's excellent at her job, just busting it out every day, but has a horrible attitude. Every time somebody walks up to her desk, she bites their head off. She hangs up on members of the public who call in. She gets upset with them and hangs up on them, that sort of thing, but she's getting the job done. As long as you have those things documented. I had 3 conversations with her in the last 2 months about attitude towards the public. Bad behavior. You have those things documented, you are okay. If you don't have it in writing, it didn't happen, which means you did not address it. She did not do that. You did not address it, and she's fine. So that's why you need to have that history behind it when you make these decisions.
What if, I've seen situations where, I don't know, kind of hard to explain a little bit, but it's kind of the same thing. You've got a person who is a high performer, so in her, I guess it's just kind of the same thing. I would say in their evaluations or the documentation, it's like, does a really good job with this or that, but then I guess if it's kind of like an attitude thing, you just have to show them that you talk to them about their attitude from time to time.
Yeah, document the behavior.
I can see that being kind of a...
It is a can of worms.
Yeah.
It is the hot mess that you think that it is. And a lot of times what happens in situations like this when we're looking at them, you know, in litigation or there's a claim made, it's like everybody knows that person's a bad actor, but there's nothing in writing. And so the supervisor would call me and they'll be like, hey, I want to fire this person on Friday. I've had it. This is the last time. You know, they ripped somebody's head off that came in to file a permit or something, and you know, I can't tolerate it anymore. Real story. I'm not even kidding you. Not your city, not your county, but a real story in Idaho. And so I asked the person, I was like, okay, you know, clearly a bad actor. How long have they been with your organization? 3 years. How long have they been a problem? How long have they been copying an attitude? 3 years. Okay. Can you please send me the documentation? I'd like to take a look at it and see what leg we're standing on. I got documentation, 3 pages of documentation. Guess when it was written? The day that I asked for it. The day that I asked for it. They went back and looked at their calendar and wrote all this stuff down. Have you had conversations with this employee about their attitude? Have you had conversations about how they're talking to people? Yeah. When? A couple of months ago. Which month a couple of months ago? February or March? What week? But I've talked to him about it several
I guess
times.
sometimes it's important for us to realize, because I had a situation like this in my business, where I had an employee that just didn't show up to work sometimes. They'd come in at 10 o'clock and you're supposed to be there at 7 or 7:30. They'd come in at 10, some days they didn't even show up. And so and then he quit and filed for unemployment. And we were like, well, no, he didn't come to work, and they still gave him unemployment because we had made it clear that not coming to work
Was a
He didn't
condition
come
of
to
the
work,
job.
He was in jeopardy of losing his job, and we kind of like, well, we thought that was kind of common sense, but.
Yep, but it's
You know,
not.
it has to be
It's
documented.
truly not. I cannot tell you, I have fought dozens and dozens of unemployment claims. You wouldn't believe it. If you don't make it clear, and when it goes to juries love employees, and they don't so much like employers, even if they are public. And even though the person was a complete terror at the job, they will have empathy for them if you didn't sit them down and explain to them that we start at 7 a.m. You need to be here at 7 a.m. And if you're not here at 7 a.m., 3 other people have to cover the phones and answer questions from the public. So, and they're unable to do their job because they're covering your job. So your job starts at 7. You need to be here at 7. If you don't do that, you can lose claims. It's ridiculous, but it's absolutely true.
So when I call someone in, or when I document something, I always call them in. After I've documented, I'll call that person in, talk to them, let them read what I wrote, and then I have them sign it.
Perfect.
And that will turn it in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's perfect. And a lot of times you'll run into stuff and the whole other class on documentation and coaching, and a lot of times, you know, you may run into situations where people like go, I ain't signing that. I'm not gonna sign that. No. Now what? You know, just write it down. refuse to sign. The next time you have that conversation with them, you have a witness in the room, another supervisor, member of your leadership team, or your HR person as a witness, and they can sign off as a witness. But yeah, the more documentation is better, but not too much. You don't want to have a situation where you have an employee with a file this thick, right? And all your other employees have a file this thick because that looks like you're picking on them. And sometimes it is, because sometimes we don't take action quick enough. So we write them up a dozen times, but we just keep letting them do it. That's just a tolerant environment. Okay, we made it to the end. So, harassment can happen in any work environment. There are serious consequences for harassing, but there's also serious consequences for ignoring it, and that's just something to keep in mind, and especially serious consequences for participating in it. As a supervisor team, you are a member of your leadership team, and you are, when you do things, you speak for the organization in the sense of your employees. So, as a leader, if you ignore something, you're kind of ignoring it on behalf of your organization, and that cannot happen. Your team looks up to you. They may not always act like it, but you are the model of what is allowed, what is tolerated, and what is accepted in your work environment. You walk the line, they'll walk the line. Hopefully. Not always, but let's set the example. You stand around and tell dirty jokes, that's what they're going to do as well. Take harassment seriously and investigate it. Talk to your employees about the behavior, turn it over to your leadership team so that they can have it investigated. If you see something, say something. If you think you might have seen something, say something. It's okay to ask a question. What's going on there? What was that? Maybe it's nothing. At least you asked a question, right? Write it down. Document, 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 document. Please, I beg you, document. Write these things down. Keep a journal. If you don't know where or how to document, talk to your HR person or your direct manager. Whether you keep that in a Word file, an Excel spreadsheet, supervisor book that you keep, whatever you do, make sure that you know where you're supposed to keep that documentation, you have it available to you, and you refer to it when you're having additional conversations with your employees. If you need examples of that, certainly let me know. Okay, and then get in there and supervise. If you sent your employees off, they probably are. Talk to them. It may have nothing, they may not be being harassed, maybe nothing, but at least you'll know that it isn't. If you see someone loitering, those sorts of things, tell them to move on. Don't be afraid to just address the behavior. Don't make excuses. Document incidents and conversations and report to senior leadership or HR. That's really the role that you need to be playing. Any questions? Okay, so if you have questions about techniques or issues, please feel free to contact me. If you have complaints that come to you, take those to your leadership team and they will address them. I can't address complaints within your organization, but I'm certainly happy to help you and coach you if you're having a difficult conversation or you need help with that. Your leadership team will do that for you as well. Just make sure that complaints go their direction. Because if you bring a complaint to me, I will promptly tell them. I will hand it over. That's it. You're free to go. Thank you so much for coming in.